Dalton Keene had expected an empty cabin. What he found instead was the kind of trouble a man didn't walk away from. She was standing barefoot in front of the fire, hair loose around her shoulders, wearing a shirt that clearly didn't belong to her. The hem brushed the tops of her thighs, and in her hands was a rifle, leveled straight at his chest. If you're a true Wild West soul, drop a big yes in the comments. Let's see who's still riding the trail with us. For a moment, neither of them moved. The fire popped. Outside, the wind clawed at the windows. But all Dalton saw was her. Those green eyes locked on him like she was deciding whether to shoot or kiss him. "I'll give you one chance to turn around and walk out," she said, her voice low, rough, and entirely too calm for someone staring down a stranger. Dalton took a slow step inside, boots heavy on the creaking floor. "I bought this place," he said. "Paid cash, sight unseen." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then you bought yourself a problem." There was no fear in her, and that unsettled him more than the rifle. The air between them felt hot and sharp, like lightning about to strike. He found himself noticing things he shouldn't. The curve of her mouth, the pulse fluttering in her throat, the way her shirt slipped just enough to hint at bare skin beneath. "Name's Dalton Keene," he offered. "Doesn't matter," she said. "You're leaving." Dalton stepped closer, slow enough to give her time to pull the trigger if she wanted. "Not without knowing who you are." Her lips pressed together, then parted just enough for him to hear. "Cora, and if you stay, you'll end up as dead as the last man who tried to help me." That stopped him cold, not because of the threat, but because of the way her voice cracked, just slightly, like she'd been holding the weight of it for too long. He should have walked out right then, should have told her she was on her own. But something in those eyes, defiance tangled with desperation, got under his skin. "Then I guess I'll take my chances," he said, taking another step toward her. Her breath caught, just for a second, and in that small sound, he knew whatever she was running from was about to crash into both their lives. Dalton didn't lower his guard, but he eased back just enough for her to take a breath. The rifle was still in her hands, but her knuckles weren't as white now. She sank onto the edge of the worn sofa, the firelight brushing her face in gold and shadow. For the first time, he saw the exhaustion there, not just from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. "My name's Cora Lane," she said finally, her voice softer now, but with a raw edge. "This cabin, it's the only place I've been able to breathe in months." Dalton stood near the hearth, watching her. "Who are you hiding from?" Her eyes flicked to the door, as if saying his name out loud might summon him. Marcus Webb. He'd heard the name before. Anyone in the territory had. Marcus owned half the valley, bought the rest with favors and fear. Men who crossed him tended to disappear. Cora's hand went to her stomach, resting there unconsciously. That's when Dalton noticed the slight swell beneath the borrowed shirt. "You're pregnant," he said quietly. She met his gaze with a flash of defiance. 5 months, and it's not his. Dalton frowned. "That why he's after you?" She nodded once. "Marcus made a deal with my father when he got sick, money for medicine in exchange for marrying me. I was desperate enough to agree, but then, before the wedding, I fell in love with someone else. We planned to run, but Marcus found out. My father died, the man I loved vanished, and Marcus..." She stopped, her throat tightening. "He said I belonged to him, no matter what was in my belly. Said he'd raise the child as his own, and the first lesson would be to never cross Marcus Webb." The fire cracked, sending a burst of sparks up the chimney. Dalton could see her jaw trembling, but she kept her eyes on him. "I slipped away the night he hit me hard enough to put me on the floor. This cabin was the last place I thought anyone would look. And yet here I am," Dalton said. Her grip on the rifle tightened again. "If you know what's good for you, you'll leave before he finds you here. Marcus doesn't just punish the people who cross him, he punishes anyone who helps them." Dalton studied her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling deep. She wasn't asking for rescue. She was warning him, telling him to save himself. But Dalton Keene had already buried a brother because a powerful man thought he could take whatever he wanted. "Sounds to me," he said slowly, "like Marcus Webb's due for a lesson he's been needing for a long time." Something flickered in her eyes. Hope, maybe, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of hoofbeats. Dalton ladled stew into 2 bowls, the smell of venison and wild herbs filling the cabin. He set one in front of her, careful to keep his movements slow, non-threatening. She hadn't lowered the rifle until the food hit the table, and even then, it stayed propped within arm's reach. They ate in near silence. The only sounds, the clink of spoons and the occasional pop from the fire. Dalton watched her without staring, her hands small but steady, her shoulders drawn tight like she'd learned to expect a blow at any moment. "You said Marcus made a deal with your father," he said, finally breaking the quiet. "What kind of deal was worth chasing a woman halfway into the mountains?" Her gaze dropped to the bowl. "It wasn't just about me. My father owed him more than money. Marcus, he kept a ledger on folks. If you couldn't pay in coin, you paid in favors. And if you couldn't do that, he took something else: land, stock, people." Dalton's jaw tightened. "You're saying he traded you like property?" Her spoon paused mid-air. "You think that's far-fetched?" she asked, a bitter smile tugging at her mouth. "You don't know Marcus Webb." They went quiet again. Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls. Dalton's mind kept circling back to the way she'd flinched earlier, not from him, but from the idea of him moving too fast. He leaned back in his chair. "You're welcome to stay tonight, but tomorrow we figure out what happens next." She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Next is Marcus riding up here with 2 or 3 of his men, putting bullets in both of us. That's how he works. He doesn't let things go." Dalton's eyes met hers, and for the first time she didn't look away. There was fear in them, yes, but also something harder, something that had kept her alive this long. "You've been running for months?" he asked. Her shoulders dropped slightly, a crack in the armor. "Since spring. I've slept in barns, caves, under wagons. Got caught once. He locked me in his house for a week. No windows, no light. I swore I'd die in there if I didn't get out." She touched her wrist unconsciously, and Dalton saw faint, healing bruises. "After that, I ran further, changed my name, learned how to disappear. But I'm not invisible, and he's not stupid." Dalton's spoon rested in his bowl, forgotten. The story wasn't just about debt or betrayal. It was about a man who believed he owned her, body and soul, and about a woman who had risked everything to prove him wrong. The firelight caught in her eyes as she looked at him again. "You still want me here knowing that?" Dalton didn't hesitate. "I've already buried one person Marcus Webb destroyed. I'm not about to let him take another." For a long moment, neither spoke. The truce between them was thin, fragile as spun glass, but it was there. And in the quiet, Dalton thought he heard the faint echo of trouble drawing closer. Tools. Dalton was stacking wood by the hearth when he saw it, half hidden in the folds of Cora's worn satchel. The firelight caught on polished silver, and for a moment, his breath stopped. He reached down, fingers closing around the familiar weight. The engraving on the back, worn but still legible, made his chest tighten. S.K. His father's hand had carved those initials with a pocket knife years before passing it to Samuel on his 21st birthday. Dalton turned it over in his palm, the cool metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat rushing through him. "Where did you get this?" His voice came out low, dangerous. Cora froze mid-motion, her hand hovering over the kettle. She saw the watch, and her face went pale. "That's Marcus's, or it was." "No." Dalton stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "This belonged to my brother, Samuel Keene. You know that name?" Her lips parted, and something like guilt flickered there before she looked away. "Marcus. He told me once, said it was a trophy. Proof of what happens to men who stand in his way. He bragged about it." Dalton's grip on the watch tightened until the edge bit into his palm. "What exactly did he say?" Cora's voice was quieter now, as if afraid the words themselves could summon Marcus. "He said your brother wouldn't sell his water rights, that he was stubborn. So Marcus shot him on the North Trail, left him there for the buzzards. He laughed when he said it. Described the way Samuel fell, the horse bolting, the scar on his hand from some childhood accident." Dalton's throat burned. He could see Samuel's face, hear his easy laugh, the way he'd refused to bend to men like Marcus. That stubbornness had cost him his life, and now the proof of it. The watch Samuel had never taken off sat in Dalton's hand, carried like a prize by the man who'd murdered him. Cora's eyes searched his face. "I didn't know he was your brother, I swear. But I remember thinking, the way he talked about it, it wasn't just business to him. He enjoyed it." Dalton slipped the watch into his pocket, the weight of it like a promise. His rage was no longer a raw, blind thing. It had shape now, direction. Marcus Webb wasn't just Cora's nightmare. He was the man who'd taken Samuel from him. "You should have told me sooner," Dalton said. Her chin lifted a fraction. "Would you have believed me?" He didn't answer. The truth was he didn't know. But now belief wasn't in question. He had the watch, the story, and a name to carve into the reckoning that was coming. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the first hint of snow. Inside, the fire burned low, and in Dalton's chest, something far hotter began to take shape. Justice, or something darker. Dalton didn't sleep. He sat at the table long after the fire burned down, the silver watch in his palm, the faint ticking filling the silence like a heartbeat from the grave. By the time the first hint of light bled over the mountains, his mind was set. There would be no more hiding, no more running. Not for him, and not for Cora. The ride to Marcus Webb's ranch was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and sharpened everything inside you. Dalton didn't feel it. His thoughts were fixed, every hoofbeat pounding in time with Samuel's name. Marcus was where Dalton expected him, lounging in front of the big white ranch house, a glass of whiskey in hand, surrounded by half a dozen armed men. He was dressed like a man expecting company, boots polished, coat pressed, a thin smile curving his lips when he saw Dalton ride in. "Well, well, if it isn't the man who thinks he bought himself a cabin and a woman all in the same deal," Marcus drawled, loud enough for his men to chuckle. Dalton swung down from the saddle, his movements calm, deliberate. "You killed my brother, Samuel Keene." Marcus's smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker, just for a second, in his eyes. "Never heard of him." "Rancher, North Trail, 6 months ago, scar on his left hand." The smile widened into something crueler. "Oh, that's Samuel. Stubborn fool. Thought a patch of water was worth dying for. Turns out he was right." He took a sip of whiskey, savoring it. "I suppose you're here to make me pay for it." Dalton stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until only the hired gun stood as a thin buffer. "I'm here to give you a chance to draw first, at dawn, you and me." The men around Marcus shifted uneasily, eyes darting between them. Marcus chuckled, setting his glass aside. "A duel? You really think you can outshoot me?" Dalton's voice was steady. "I know I can." For a moment, the only sound was the creak of leather as Marcus's men adjusted their grips on their rifles. Then Marcus leaned back, hands spread as if indulging a child. "All right, Keen, dawn it is. I'll even let you pick the spot." Dalton turned to leave, but Marcus called after him. "Bring the woman. I want her to see how quick you fall." Dalton didn't look back. "You won't live to see her again." As he mounted up, he caught the faint stir of unease in the men's faces. They didn't know it yet, but tomorrow morning, one of them would be digging a grave, and Dalton intended to make sure it was Marcus Webb. The ride back was slower, the sun bleeding red across the horizon. In his pocket, the watch ticked on, counting down the hours until justice, or vengeance. At dawn, they would be the same thing. The sun was barely up when Dalton stepped into the clearing, the pale morning light spilling through the pines like a slow leak. Dust hung in the still air, each mote catching the light as though the world had paused to watch. Across from him, Marcus stood loose and easy, a predator at rest, his coat open to show the gleam of his pistol. Two of his men lingered at the edge of the clearing, their smirks saying they already knew how this would end. Dalton's heartbeat was steady now. The hours of waiting had burned away the fury, leaving something colder, sharper. His boots crunched in the dirt as he took his position, eyes locked on the man who had taken his brother's life. "On three," Marcus called, voice smooth as oiled leather. "One." Dalton's mind emptied. No thought, no fear, just the memory of the Samuel's voice from long ago, teaching him how to line up a shot, how to trust his hands. "Two." The wind shifted, carrying the faint creak of a saddle from somewhere behind. Dalton's fingers hovered, not tense, but ready. "Three." The world snapped into motion. Marcus's hand blurred, his gun clearing leather almost faster than the eye could follow, but Dalton's draw was born of grief, honed by long, lonely hours on the range. The report of his Colt split the morning, the recoil biting into his palm. Marcus staggered back 2 steps, surprise etched in his face before he crumpled into the dirt. His pistol lay half drawn, never fired. For a moment, the clearing was silent except for the echo of the shot fading into the trees. Dalton stood over the body, chest rising and falling, the watch in his pocket pressing warm against his thigh. Then the stillness broke. "You're done, Keen," the thin one said, stepping forward with his gun already leveled. The other man mirrored him, eyes bright with anticipation. "Boss might be dead, but you just murdered a respected man. Sheriff will hang you before sundown." Dalton's revolver hung at his side empty. Reloading now would take seconds he didn't have. He shifted his weight, measuring the distance, knowing the odds. "You should have minded your own business, cowboy," the second man sneered. "Now you're gonna—" The crack of a rifle split the air. The thin man spun, clutching his shoulder, his gun tumbling into the dust. Dalton's head whipped toward the cabin, and there she was, Cora. Framed in the doorway, the old hunting rifle steady in her hands. "The next shot," she said evenly, "won't be a warning." The remaining gunman hesitated just long enough for Dalton to dive behind Marcus's body and slam fresh rounds into his Colt. By the time he came up firing, the man was already running for his horse. Dalton let him go. One witness might just be the kind of insurance he'd need before the day was over. The dust settled over Marcus Webb's lifeless body, and Dalton knew this wasn't the end, only the first shot in a longer fight. Dalton could still smell the gunpowder in the air when movement at the cabin window caught his eye. Cora was there, framed in the morning light, her hair loose around her shoulders, the worn wood stock of an old hunting rifle braced tight against her shoulder. She looked nothing like the frightened woman he'd met days ago. Her eyes were steady, jaw set, a deadly calm radiating from her that made both of Marcus's men falter. The rifle cracked again before either could react. The thin man yelped, spinning as the bullet tore into his shoulder, his pistol clattering uselessly to the dirt. His friend froze for half a heartbeat, torn between charging forward or cutting his losses. "The next shot," Cora called out, her voice carrying across the clearing, "won't be a warning." The remaining gunman's eyes darted between Dalton, now crouched with his revolver freshly loaded, and the woman in the window who'd just dropped his partner with a single shot. He backed a step toward his horse, fingers twitching nervously at his side. "Go on," Dalton said, his voice low and dangerous. "Make the wrong move." The man snarled but didn't test him. Instead, he made a sudden break for the saddled bay at the edge of the clearing. Dalton raised his Colt, sighting down the barrel, but something in him stopped the trigger from breaking. A fleeing man could be worth more alive, especially when word of Marcus Webb's death started moving through town. The bay's hooves pounded against the hard dirt as the rider tore off toward the trail. Dalton tracked him until he vanished into the trees, then lowered his weapon. Cora was already stepping out of the cabin, the rifle cradled in her arms as though it were an extension of herself. Her breathing was steady, her face unreadable. She stopped a few feet from Marcus's body, looking down at him for a long moment. "You didn't hesitate," Dalton said quietly. "He would have killed you," she replied without looking up. "Or me, or both." Her eyes flicked toward the trail where the lone rider had disappeared. "But he's not running away. He's bringing more." Dalton holstered his Colt, his mind already shifting. Reinforcements meant time was short, and when they arrived, they wouldn't be looking for the truth. They'd be looking for blood. Cora knelt briefly, not to touch Marcus, but to retrieve a small leather pouch from his coat. She opened it just enough for Dalton to see the glint of the silver watch inside. "You should keep this," she said, handing it over. "It always belonged to you anyway." The metal was warm from Marcus's body, the familiar weight of it pulling Dalton back into old memories. He slipped it into his pocket without a word. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the faint echo of galloping hooves reminded him that the morning wasn't over, and that the real fight might be coming straight for them. Dalton heard them before he saw them, the steady rhythm of multiple horses pounding up the trail. He stepped onto the porch, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt, and saw the riders emerge from the trees in a tight formation. At the front was Sheriff Morrison, broad-shouldered and weathered by years of hard riding, his badge catching the morning light. 6 armed deputies fanned out behind him, and off to the side, slumped in the saddle but very much alive, was the man Cora had let ride away the day before. The wounded gunman pointed toward Dalton the moment they slowed. "That's him! Shot Mr. Webb in cold blood and ran off with his wife." His voice cracked with desperation, but the words were slick and practiced, built for the ear of a lawman. Morrison's gaze swept over the scene, the body of Marcus Webb lying in the dust, the faint whiff of old gunpowder still clinging to the air, Cora standing barefoot in the doorway with the hunting rifle at her side. "Miss Lane," he said carefully, "Marcus reported you were taken by bandits. He's been organizing a search party for weeks." Cora stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Sheriff, Marcus Webb forced me into marriage to pay my father's debts. When I told him I was carrying another man's child, he became violent. I ran before he could kill me." The wounded man barked a laugh. "Lies. He was trying to bring her home. This one." He jabbed a finger at Dalton. "Shot him down like a dog." Dalton pulled the silver watch from his pocket, the initials SK glinting on the back. "Marcus bragged about killing my brother, Samuel Keene, for refusing to sell his water rights. He kept this as a trophy. Miss Lane heard him tell the story himself." Morrison took the watch, turning it over in his weathered hands. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Recognition, then something darker. "I remember this," he murmured. "Samuel never went anywhere without it." Before the wounded man could speak again, Cora ducked inside and returned with a bundle of papers bound in twine. These are the documents Marcus forced my dying father to sign. You'll see the debt amounts and the threats written in Marcus's own hand." The sheriff studied them for a long, tense moment, his jaw tightening. "These aren't marriage papers," he said finally. "They're extortion notes." The gunman's composure cracked. He spurred his horse toward the trees, but 2 deputies moved fast, cutting him off and dragging him down before he could vanish. Morrison turned back to Dalton. "Seems I've been chasing the wrong man. The question now is, what else was Marcus Webb hiding?" Dalton glanced toward the cabin where Samuel's map lay hidden in his coat pocket. Whatever came next, the truth was buried somewhere in the mountains, and he intended to find it. Dalton sat at the small table in the cabin, the silver watch open in his hands. Its familiar weight was a comfort and a wound all at once. Samuel's initials were carved into the back, the same way their father had done when passing it down. But it was what lay beneath the delicate hands of the timepiece that made Dalton's pulse quicken. A tiny folded slip of paper, yellowed and worn from years of being hidden. He eased it free, careful not to tear it, and unfolded it across the table. The handwriting was unmistakable. Samuel's bold, steady script. It was a hand-drawn map of the mountains north of the cabin, marked with winding trails and an X tucked deep into a shaded ravine. At the bottom, Samuel had scrawled a line that caught Dalton like a punch to the gut. "For my brother Dalton, if anything happens to me." Cora leaned over his shoulder, her breath warm against his cheek. "He knew Marcus was going to kill him," she whispered, "and he wanted you to find this." Sheriff Morrison, still inside from their talk, stepped closer. Dalton handed him the map. The sheriff studied it in silence, then gave a short nod. "I know that stretch. If Samuel hid something there, it's worth the ride." They set out at first light, the sheriff, 2 deputies, Dalton and Cora, who refused to be left behind. The trail wound higher into the mountains, the air thinning and cooling until every breath felt sharp. The ravine was exactly where Samuel had drawn it, narrow and steep, hidden behind a curtain of pines. Dalton's hands found the cache before his eyes did. A flat rock pried loose revealed a hollow beneath, wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were ledgers, deeds, and a stack of letters detailing Marcus's dealings. Stolen land from ranchers who'd vanished, forged transfers of water rights, and payouts to officials who looked the other way. There were names Dalton recognized, men who still held office in the territory. Morrison turned page after page, his expression hardening. "This isn't just Marcus Webb," he said. "This is half the county in here." Back in town, the evidence struck like a hammer. Warrants were issued, property seized, and men who'd walked untouchable for years found themselves in irons. Families who'd lost everything were given their land back. Cora's marriage to Marcus was declared invalid by the territorial court, and she was awarded a sum from his estate that meant she'd never want for anything again. Dalton stood in the courthouse hallway the day it was all finalized, the watch in his pocket and the weight of justice, real justice, settling into his bones. Samuel's map had been more than a clue. It was his brother's last act, a hand reaching from the grave to set things right, and Dalton intended to honor it for the rest of his life. The snow had melted from the hills, leaving the air crisp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Dalton stood on the porch of the rebuilt cabin, the fresh wood still golden in the morning sun. It felt strange to see the place whole again, not the battered refuge where so much had changed, but something new, something that belonged to them both. Cora was in the yard, her hair loose and catching the light as she pinned laundry to the line. Her pregnancy was showing now, the curve of her belly impossible to miss beneath her pale dress. She moved slowly with that careful grace of a woman carrying something precious, one hand often resting protectively over her stomach. Every so often she would pause, as if listening for something inside herself. Dalton leaned against the porch post, letting his eyes linger on her. He'd bought this cabin to be alone, to bury himself in quiet and let the world pass him by. Instead, fate, or maybe Samuel, had handed him a rifle-point introduction to a woman who had turned his life inside out. She looked up and caught him staring. A small smile curved her lips. "The baby kicked for the first time this morning," she said. He stepped down from the porch, crossing the yard until he stood before her. "That's so." She nodded, her eyes bright despite the shadows that had once lived there. "Strong, too. Maybe a boy." Her voice softened. "If it is, I thought I'd name him Samuel, for the man who made all of this possible." Dalton swallowed hard, looking past her for a moment to the mountains rising in the distance. His brother had believed that good people found each other when they needed it most. Dalton had never put much stock in fate, but standing here now, with justice done, Cora safe, and a new life on the way, he wondered if Samuel had been right all along. Cora reached for his hand, placing it over the swell of her belly. "Feel that?" she asked. A faint push met his palm and something tightened in his chest, something that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with hope. "I feel it," he said quietly. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of fresh-cut lumber from the barn and the distant sound of the creek running high with spring melt. It was a new season in every sense, and Dalton felt ready for it. "You know," he said, glancing toward the cabin, "when I bought this place, I thought it was the end of things. Turns out it was just the start." Cora smiled, her eyes warm as she looked up at him. "Some surprises," she said, "are worth keeping." Dalton believed her, and as he drew her close, the mountain stood silent witness to a man who had lost everything, only to find more than he ever thought to hope for. That's the end of the trail, folks. Drop a yes if you're a true Wild West fan. Thanks for riding with me.